The lecture hall buzzed with quiet conversations in 17 different languages as students filed in for advanced xenobiology. Alex Stone found his usual seat in the back row, pulling out his datapad while trying to ignore the curious stares from his classmates. Being one of only 3 humans at the Galactic Academy meant he was always the odd one out. Dr. Threnwick glided into the room on his crystalline legs, his translucent Altarian body catching the light in prismatic patterns. The elderly professor had been teaching at the Academy for over 2 centuries, and his reputation for brilliant lectures was known throughout the galaxy. Today's topic, according to the syllabus, was species stability and evolutionary success patterns. Good morning, future xenobiologists. Dr. Threnwick's voice resonated through the room's translation matrix. Today we examine one of the most fascinating aspects of galactic life, the remarkable stability that allows species to reach the stars. Alex settled back in his chair, expecting another dry academic discussion. His classmates, representing dozens of different worlds, leaned forward with interest. There was Kira from the gas giant Nephron, her floating biosuit keeping her comfortable in the oxygen-rich environment. Next to her sat Brahm, whose thick bark-like skin marked him as a native of the forest world Verdania. In the front row, a cluster of insectoid students from the hive worlds clicked softly to each other in their complex language. Let us begin with a fundamental truth, Dr. Threnwick continued, activating the holographic display that dominated the center of the room. A 3-dimensional star map appeared, showing the locations of all known spacefaring civilizations. Extinction events are extraordinarily rare among species that achieve interstellar travel. Our data shows that less than 0.001% of spacefaring species have experienced true extinction-level events. The professor gestured to various points on the map. The Altarians, my own people, have maintained stable populations for over 50,000 years. The Verdanian civilization has existed unchanged for nearly as long. The hive worlds have seen population growth for 30 millennia, without a single major die-off. Alex frowned, checking his own datapad. The numbers Dr. Threnwick was presenting seemed impossible when compared to what he knew about human history. This stability, Dr. Threnwick continued, is the natural result of evolution on stable worlds. Planets with predictable climates, abundant resources, and few natural disasters allow species to develop sophisticated civilizations without the constant threat of annihilation. It is, quite simply, the normal path of development. A student from the aquatic world of Tidal raised a webbed hand. Professor, what about worlds with more challenging environments? Surely some species face greater difficulties. Dr. Threnwick nodded approvingly. An excellent question. Even on worlds we classify as challenging, the extinction rate remains remarkably low. Species adapt to their environments and achieve stability. The key is that natural selection favors cooperation and gradual adaptation rather than violent upheaval. Alex felt his chest tighten. Everything the professor was saying contradicted what he knew about his own species. He looked around the room at his classmates, all nodding along with the lecture, and realized they truly believed this was how evolution worked everywhere. The mathematical models are quite clear, Dr. Threnwick continued, pulling up complex equations on the holographic display. Species that reach technological sophistication do so because they have overcome the chaotic forces that might cause extinction. Stability breeds intelligence, and intelligence breeds stability. It is a positive feedback loop that ensures long-term survival. Alex raised his hand slowly, his heart pounding. Dr. Threnwick noticed and nodded for him to speak. Professor, Alex said, his voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. What if a species reached the stars despite constant extinction events? What if stability wasn't part of their development at all? The room fell silent. Several students turned in their seats to look at Alex with expressions ranging from confusion to amusement. Dr. Threnwick tilted his crystalline head, the equivalent of a puzzled expression. I'm not sure I understand your question, Cadet Stone. As I've just explained, species simply cannot reach technological sophistication while facing constant extinction pressure. The two are mutually exclusive. Alex took a deep breath. 99% of our species are gone. The silence in the room became absolute. Even the soft clicking of the insectoid students stopped. Dr. Threnwick's prismatic body flickered with what Alex had learned to recognize as extreme surprise. I beg your pardon? The professor said. 99% of our species are gone, Alex repeated, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. Humans have faced dozens of near-extinction events. We've been reduced to populations of just a few thousand individuals multiple times throughout our history. Most of our evolutionary cousins are extinct. Most of our early civilizations are extinct. Most of our languages are extinct. Dr. Threnwick's form began to shift colors, cycling through what Alex knew were expressions of disbelief and concern. Cadet Stone, I think there may be some misunderstanding about your species' history. Perhaps you're referring to natural evolutionary branching or historical conflicts that seem larger in retrospect than they actually were. No, sir, Alex said, pulling up files on his datapad. I'm talking about ice ages that lasted hundreds of thousands of years. Supervolcanic eruptions that blocked out the sun for decades. Asteroid impacts that wiped out entire continents. Plagues that killed half our population in a matter of years. We've been through genetic bottlenecks so severe that at one point, there may have been fewer than 10,000 humans alive on our entire planet. The insectoid student in the front row made a sound that the translator rendered as impossible. Kira's biosuit began, flashing warning lights as her stress levels spiked. Brahm's bark-like skin darkened to a deep brown that Alex had learned indicated shock. Dr. Threnwick moved closer to Alex's seat, his crystalline structure now cycling rapidly through colors. Cadet Stone, if what you're suggesting were true, your species would never have survived to develop technology, let alone reach the stars. The mathematical models simply don't support such a scenario. But we did survive, Alex said quietly. Every time 90% of us died, the remaining 10% found a way to rebuild. Every time our civilizations collapsed, we started over. Every time nature tried to wipe us out completely, we adapted and came back stronger. The room remained silent as Alex's words sank in. He could see his classmates trying to process the concept of a species that had not only survived constant near extinction, but had somehow thrived because of it. Dr. Threnwick finally spoke, his voice careful and measured. Cadet Stone, I think we need to examine your claims more carefully. If there's even a possibility that your species represents a completely different evolutionary path, it would revolutionize everything we understand about the development of intelligent life. Alex nodded, understanding that he had just challenged the fundamental assumptions of galactic xenobiology. As his classmates continued to stare at him with a mixture of disbelief and fascination, he realized that his simple statement had opened a door to questions that no one in the galaxy had ever thought to ask. The lecture that was supposed to be about stability and success had become something entirely different. It had become the first step toward understanding that some species don't reach the stars despite their challenges, but because of them. The Academy's central library never slept. Its vast databanks hummed constantly as information flowed between the collected knowledge of hundreds of worlds. Dr. Threnwick had spent the entire night here, his crystalline form casting shifting patterns of light across the research terminals as he worked. 3 days had passed since Alex Stone's startling declaration in class, and the professor found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. The young human's claim that 99% of his species were extinct contradicted everything Threnwick understood about evolutionary biology. Yet something in the cadet's quiet certainty had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Still here, Doctor? The voice belonged to Kess, the library's chief archivist. Her multiple tentacles moved gracefully as she organized data crystals, each appendage working independently while her large, intelligent eyes focused on Threnwick. You've been at this for 72 hours straight. Threnwick looked up from his terminal where Earth's basic planetary data glowed in holographic display. I'm trying to understand something that should be impossible, Kess. This human world, Earth. Have you ever studied the Deathworld classifications in detail? Kess paused in her work, several tentacles curling in what Threnwick recognized as concern. Deathworlds? Not really. Most Academy instructors avoid those files. They're considered academic curiosities at best, nightmare scenarios at worst. Why would anyone want to study worlds where life barely survives? Because, Threnwick said slowly, it appears that one of those worlds has produced a spacefaring species. He gestured to the display showing Earth's classification. The designation Class 12 Deathworld pulsed in ominous red letters. Below it, a long list of environmental hazards scrolled endlessly. Extreme temperature variations, massive tectonic activity, frequent asteroid impacts, unstable climate patterns, aggressive biological systems. Kess moved closer, her tentacles reaching out to manipulate the display controls. Class 12? That's the highest rating. Most Class 8 worlds are considered uninhabitable by any reasonable standard. How could intelligent life evolve there, let alone reach technological sophistication? That's what I'm trying to understand, Threnwick replied. Look at this data on human population history. The display shifted to show a timeline of human development. Population numbers fluctuated wildly, showing dramatic drops followed by gradual recoveries, then more drops. The pattern repeated over and over across hundreds of thousands of years. Kess studied the data with growing amazement. These population crashes, some of them show reductions of over 90%, and they happen repeatedly. How is this possible? According to the geological records, Threnwick said, pulling up additional files, Earth experiences regular catastrophic events. Ice ages that last for millennia, supervolcanic eruptions that change the global climate, asteroid impacts that cause mass extinctions. The planet seems actively hostile to complex life. The library's main doors opened with a soft chime, and Alex Stone entered. He looked tired, and Threnwick suspected the young human had been losing sleep over the controversy his statement had caused. Word had spread throughout the academy about the human cadet who claimed his species had survived the impossible. Cadet Stone, Threnwick called out. Perfect timing. I've been reviewing your planet's records, and I have to admit, I'm finding it difficult to reconcile the data with known evolutionary theory. Alex approached their research station, glancing at the displays with a grim expression. Most humans try not to think about it too much. Our history is pretty depressing when you look at it all together. Kess extended a tentacle toward Alex in greeting. I'm Kess, the chief archivist. Dr. Threnwick has been showing me your world's classification. I've never seen anything like it. How does your species maintain any kind of civilization with these constant disasters? Alex settled into a chair designed for humanoid species. We don't maintain civilization. We rebuild it over and over again. Every few thousand years, something happens that knocks us back to almost nothing, and we start over. Threnwick leaned forward, his prismatic body shifting to colors that indicated intense interest. But how do you preserve knowledge? How do you maintain technological progress if you're constantly starting from scratch? We get really good at preserving the important stuff, Alex said with a sad smile. And we get really good at learning fast. When you know that disaster could wipe out everything at any moment, you become obsessed with passing on what matters to the next generation. The professor began pulling up more detailed records. These genetic studies show something remarkable. Human genetic diversity is far lower than it should be for a species your age. It's as if your entire population descended from very small groups of survivors. Because we did, Alex confirmed. There's evidence that at least once, maybe more, the entire human species was reduced to just a few thousand individuals. Maybe even fewer. Everyone alive today is descended from the people who made it through that bottleneck. Kess made a sound that the translator couldn't interpret, but her tentacles curled tightly in what was clearly distress. That should have meant extinction. Populations that small can't maintain genetic viability. Unless they're incredibly adaptable, Alex said. The humans who survived those events weren't just lucky. They were the ones who could eat anything, live anywhere, and work together under impossible conditions. Natural selection didn't just favor intelligence in our species. It favored toughness. Threnwick began to understand the implications. So every catastrophe that should have destroyed your species instead eliminated the less adaptable individuals, leaving only the survivors to reproduce. Exactly. And those survivors had children who were even better at surviving disasters, because that's what their parents were selected for. Alex gestured to the timeline display. Every one of those population crashes made the humans who came after more resilient. The professor stared at the data with growing amazement. His entire understanding of evolution had been based on stable environments, where gradual adaptation led to increasing specialization. But here was evidence of a completely different evolutionary path, one driven by constant crisis and catastrophe. This explains so much about human behavior patterns, Threnwick murmured. Your species' tendency toward risk-taking, your ability to adapt quickly to new environments, your instinct to plan for worst-case scenarios. When your baseline expectation is that everything will go wrong, Alex said, you get really good at dealing with problems that other species would consider impossible. Kes had been quietly manipulating her data controls, pulling up comparative studies. "Doctor, look at this. I've been comparing Earth's environmental challenges to other known worlds. Most Class 8 death worlds have one or two major hazards. Earth has dozens. It's not just a dangerous world, it's a world that seems designed to create extinction events. And yet here we are," Alex said quietly. 99% gone, but the 1% that made it to the stars is tougher than anything the galaxy has ever seen. Threnwick felt his worldview shifting in fundamental ways. For centuries, he had taught that stability and gradual progress were the keys to evolutionary success. But the evidence before him suggested that some species reached the stars, not despite facing constant extinction. "But because of it, Cadet Stone," he said finally, "I think you may have just revolutionized the field of xenobiology. If your species represents a viable alternative evolutionary pathway, we need to completely reconsider our understanding of how intelligent life develops." Alex looked uncomfortable with the attention. "I just told you the truth about human history. I didn't expect it to be such a big deal." "The truth often is," Kes observed, her tentacles now moving in patterns that indicated excitement. "This could change how we think about life throughout the galaxy. How many other Deathworld species might have survived and thrived in ways we never considered?" As the three of them continued to study the data, Threnwick realized that Alex's simple statement in class had opened the door to questions that would reshape galactic understanding of evolution itself. The young human hadn't just challenged a theory. He had revealed that their entire framework for understanding life in the universe was incomplete. The simulation chamber hummed to life as Alex calibrated the historical projection systems. Dr. Threnwick stood nervously behind him, the professor's crystalline body flickering with colors that indicated both curiosity and apprehension. Word about their research had spread through the academy, and several faculty members had requested access to whatever evidence the human cadet could provide. "Are you certain this is wise?" Threnwick asked as the chamber's walls began to shimmer with temporal energy. "Some of these events you've described sound quite traumatic to experience even in simulation." Alex paused in his work, looking back at the professor with tired eyes. "Dr. Threnwick, you've spent the past week reading dry statistics about human extinction events. But numbers don't tell the real story. If you want to understand how we survived, you need to see what survival actually looked like." The chamber completed its initialization, and suddenly they were standing on a vast African plain. The sky above was dark with volcanic ash, and the air tasted of sulfur and death. In the distance, scattered groups of early humans huddled around small fires, their faces gaunt with hunger. "The Toba eruption," Alex said quietly. 74,000 years ago. The largest volcanic eruption in human history. It blocked out the sun for years and triggered a volcanic winter that lasted decades. Threnwick watched in fascination as the projection showed small bands of humans moving across the devastated landscape. They were thin, desperate-looking creatures, but their eyes held a determination that the professor found remarkable. "According to genetic analysis," Alex continued, "this event reduced the entire human population to somewhere between 3,000 and 10,000 individuals, possibly fewer. Most species would have gone extinct." They watched as the projected humans searched for food in the ash-covered wasteland. When they found nothing, they ate insects. When insects became scarce, they ate tree bark. When even that ran out, they kept moving, driven by an instinct to survive that seemed to transcend rational thought. But they didn't just survive, Alex said as the simulation shifted forward in time. They learned. They developed new hunting techniques. They created tools from volcanic glass. They figured out which plants could still grow in the ash-damaged soil. Threnwick observed the humans adapting in real time, their behavior changing as they encountered each new challenge. It's remarkable. They're not just enduring the catastrophe. They're actually using it to develop new capabilities. The simulation jumped forward several thousand years, showing the descendants of the Toba survivors spreading across the globe. They looked different now, more robust with technologies and social structures far more advanced than their ancestors. The humans who survived Toba weren't just lucky, Alex explained. They were the ones who could think fast, work together under pressure, and adapt to completely new situations. Those traits got passed down to their children. The scene shifted again, this time to medieval Europe during the Black Death. Threnwick watched in horror as the plague swept through cities, killing one person in 3. But even here, in the midst of unprecedented disaster, humans were finding ways to fight back. They didn't understand what caused the plague, Alex said, but they figured out quarantine procedures. They developed new medical techniques. They reorganized their entire societies to deal with massive population loss. The professor watched medieval humans burning infected materials, isolating the sick, and creating entirely new forms of social organization in response to the crisis. They're treating the extinction event as a problem to be solved, rather than a fate to be accepted. That's the key difference, Alex said. Most species, when faced with extinction, either adapt slowly over many generations or they die out. Humans adapt immediately, within a single generation, sometimes within years or even months. The simulation moved to show the aftermath of the plague. European society had been transformed, with new technologies, new social structures, and new ways of thinking that would eventually lead to the Renaissance and the scientific revolution. The Black Death didn't just kill a third of Europe, Alex observed. It destroyed the old feudal system and forced humans to create something entirely new. Many of our greatest technological advances came directly from survival pressure. Threnwick was beginning to understand something profound about human development. Your species doesn't just survive extinction events. You use them as evolutionary catalysts. The scene shifted once more, showing the most recent near extinction in human history, the nuclear standoff of the 20th century. Threnwick watched as humans brought themselves to the brink of total annihilation, then somehow managed to step back from the edge. We built weapons that could destroy our entire planet, Alex said, his voice heavy with the weight of that knowledge. And we came within hours of using them. But we didn't. Somehow we found a way to be rational even when we were terrified. The simulation showed the tense moments of various nuclear crises, the split-second decisions that prevented global war, the gradual development of treaties and diplomatic solutions that no one had thought possible. Even when the threat was ourselves, Alex continued, we adapted. We learned to manage our own destructive capabilities. We developed entirely new forms of international cooperation. Threnwick watched as the simulation showed humans eventually reaching for the stars, their space technology driven largely by the same survival instincts that had carried them through countless disasters. Your technological development isn't following the normal pattern at all. Instead of gradual progress, you have these sudden leaps forward driven by crisis. We call it necessity being the mother of invention, Alex said with a grim smile. When you're facing extinction, you get really creative really fast. The simulation chamber powered down, returning them to the sterile academic environment of the academy. But Threnwick found that the experience had changed something fundamental in his understanding of evolution and survival. Cadet Stone, he said slowly, what you've shown me suggests that human development follows a completely different model from anything we've studied. Instead of stable progress, you have crisis-driven evolution. Instead of gradual adaptation, you have rapid transformation under pressure. Alex nodded. Every time something tries to wipe us out, the survivors come back different. Stronger, smarter, more adaptable. We don't just recover from extinction events, we emerge from them as a more capable species. Threnwick's prismatic body cycled through colors indicating deep thought. This explains so much about human behavior that has puzzled the galactic community. Your willingness to take extreme risks, your ability to function under pressure, your tendency to find solutions that other species consider impossible. When you've been selected for survival over hundreds of thousands of years, Alex said, you develop a very different relationship with the impossible. As they left the simulation chamber, Threnwick realized that he was no longer just studying an interesting academic anomaly. He was looking at evidence that the galaxy's understanding of evolution itself was incomplete. Humans hadn't reached the stars despite their traumatic history. They had reached the stars because of it. The professor found himself wondering how many other species might have followed similar paths, and what that might mean for the future of galactic civilization. If humans represented a new model of development, then perhaps the galaxy was about to learn that some of its most valuable members were the ones who had survived the impossible. Admiral Corso had seen many strange things during her 40 years of military service, but she had never expected to find herself questioning the fundamental assumptions of galactic biology. The grizzled Centaurian commander sat across from Dr. Threnwick in the Academy's main conference room. Her forearms folded as she listened to the professor's increasingly incredible report. "Let me understand this correctly," Admiral Corso said, her scarred face showing skepticism. "You're telling me that humans have survived dozens of extinction-level events, and that this somehow makes them more capable rather than less?" Dr. Threnwick activated the holographic display that dominated the center of the conference table. Charts and graphs filled the air between them, showing the data he had compiled over the past 2 weeks. "The evidence is overwhelming, Admiral. Human development follows a completely different pattern from any other known species." Around the table, the Academy's senior faculty shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Professor Yan from the engineering department, a tall, thin being from the crystal caves of Sigma Prime, leaned forward with obvious doubt. "Dr. Threnwick, with respect, this seems to contradict centuries of established evolutionary theory." "Which is exactly why we need to take it seriously," Threnwick replied. "Science advances by challenging established theories when new evidence emerges." The conference room doors opened, and Alex Stone entered with visible reluctance. Word of his professor's research had spread throughout the Academy, and Alex found himself the unwilling center of attention from faculty and students alike. Admiral Corso gestured for him to take a seat. "Cadet Stone," the Admiral said, "Dr. Threnwick has been sharing some remarkable claims about your species. I'd like to hear your perspective on this matter." Alex settled into his chair, looking around the table at the assembled faculty. "I'm not sure what perspective you want, Admiral. I just told Dr. Threnwick the truth about human history. Most of us are gone, but the ones who made it this far are pretty hard to kill." Professor Yan made a dismissive gesture with his crystalline appendages. "Cadet, surely you must understand that what you're describing is impossible. No species can survive repeated population reductions of 90% or more. The genetic bottlenecks alone would ensure extinction, unless the survivors are selected for traits that make bottlenecks survivable," Alex replied calmly. "Humans who made it through extinction events weren't random survivors. They were the ones who could adapt fast, work together under pressure, and keep functioning when everything went wrong." Admiral Corso pulled up tactical displays on her personal data pad. "I've been reviewing human military records since Dr. Threnwick first brought this to my attention. Your species' approach to warfare is unlike anything I've seen." The holographic display shifted to show historical human battles. The faculty watched in fascination, as human forces repeatedly succeeded against impossible odds, using tactics that other species would consider suicidal. "Look at this engagement," Admiral Corso continued, highlighting a particular battle. "Outnumbered 50-1, cut off from reinforcements, facing superior technology. Any rational military commander would surrender. Instead, the humans found a way to turn their disadvantages into advantages." Alex watched the tactical display with familiar recognition. "That's pretty standard human military thinking. We assume we're going to be outnumbered and outgunned, so we plan for scenarios that other species don't consider possible." Professor Kell from the psychology department, whose blue-scaled skin indicated growing excitement, leaned forward. "This suggests a completely different cognitive framework. Most species develop risk aversion as a survival trait. Humans seem to have developed the opposite." "Not the opposite," Alex corrected. "We developed the ability to take calculated risks under extreme pressure. When extinction is always a possibility, you get really good at figuring out which desperate plans might actually work." Dr. Threnwick brought up another set of data. "Consider human technological development patterns. Most species show steady, gradual progress over millennia. Human technology shows sudden leaps forward, almost always coinciding with crisis periods." The display showed the rapid advancement of human technology during various disasters and wars. In just a few decades, humans had gone from basic flight to space travel, driven by the pressure of global conflict. "This acceleration pattern appears in every field," Threnwick continued. "Medicine, engineering, communications, energy production. Humans don't just innovate to improve their lives. They innovate to survive immediate threats." Admiral Corso studied the data with growing interest. "This explains something that has puzzled military strategists throughout the galaxy. Human forces consistently perform better under pressure than in controlled conditions. We assumed it was an anomaly." "It's not an anomaly," Alex said. "It's what we were selected for. Humans who couldn't think clearly under pressure died out hundreds of thousands of years ago. The ones who could handle crisis situations survived and had children. Professor Yan remained skeptical. Even if we accept your claims about survival capabilities, how do you explain the development of complex civilization? Advanced technology requires stable conditions for research and development. Alex smiled grimly. Does it? Or does it require people who can solve complex problems really fast when their lives depend on it? Some of our greatest inventions came from people who had weeks or months to solve problems. That meant life or death for thousands of people. The faculty began to understand the implications. Dr. Threnwick pulled up comparative studies showing how human problem-solving approaches differed from galactic norms. Where other species followed careful, methodical procedures, humans showed a tendency to rapidly test multiple solutions simultaneously. This suggests that crisis-driven evolution produces different cognitive patterns, Dr. Threnwick observed. Humans don't just survive disasters. They're optimized for the kind of rapid adaptation that disasters require. Admiral Corso made a decision that would change the Academy's curriculum forever. I want to establish a new department focused on crisis adaptation studies. Dr. Threnwick, I'm putting you in charge. Cadet Stone, I'm assigning you as the primary research assistant. Admiral? Professor Yan protested. Surely we shouldn't restructure our entire academic approach based on the history of a single species. Why not? Admiral Corso shot back. If humans represent a viable alternative evolutionary pathway, then our current theories are incomplete at best. And if there are other species out there who followed similar paths, we need to understand how they think and operate. Alex felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Admiral, I'm just a cadet. I'm not qualified to teach galactic biology. You're not teaching biology, Admiral Corso replied. You're teaching survival. There's a difference, and it's one we need to understand. Over the following days, word of the new department spread throughout the Academy. Students from dozens of species signed up for courses in crisis adaptation theory. Many came out of curiosity, others because they sensed that understanding human survival strategies might be useful in their future careers. The faculty remained divided. Some embraced the new field of study, recognizing that human capabilities filled gaps in their understanding of galactic civilization. Others resisted, arguing that focusing on extinction and disaster was unhealthy for species that had evolved in stable environments. But as Dr. Threnwick began developing curriculum based on human historical examples, a pattern emerged. Students who learned crisis adaptation techniques showed improved performance in unexpected situations. They became better at solving complex problems under pressure and more capable of working together when conditions were difficult. Alex found himself in the strange position of teaching academy instructors about concepts that he had always taken for granted. The idea that most species had never faced repeated extinction was as foreign to him as human resilience was to them. The key thing to understand, he told a gathering of faculty members, is that humans don't see disaster as abnormal. We see it as the default condition. When things are going well, we're usually planning for the next crisis. Admiral Corso watched the discussions with satisfaction. The Academy was beginning to understand that humans hadn't just survived their terrible history, they had been forged by it into something the galaxy had never seen before, and that transformation was just the beginning of a much larger awakening. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called in unprecedented haste. Representatives from 47 different worlds filled the massive circular chamber, their varied forms creating a tableau of galactic diversity. At the center of it all, Counselor Prime Valdris stood before the holographic display that showed their collective doom approaching from the outer rim. The stellar remnant, designated as Object Omega-7, will reach the Kepler system in 18 standard months, Valdris announced, his tall, ethereal form shimmering with distress patterns. Current projections show that its gravitational effects will destabilize 7 inhabited systems, displacing over 2 billion beings. Murmurs of concern rippled through the assembly. The approaching stellar remnant, a collapsed star with impossible mass, was pulling entire solar systems out of their stable orbits. It was the kind of cosmic disaster that happened perhaps once in a million years, the sort of event that galactic civilization had never been forced to confront. Dr. Threnwick sat in the Academy's observer section, watching the proceedings with growing unease. Beside him, Alex Stone studied the tactical displays with an expression that the professor had learned to recognize as intense calculation. The evacuation protocols are already in motion, continued Counselor Trex from the aquatic world of Tide's End. Our ships can relocate approximately 60% of the affected populations to suitable worlds within the projected time frame. 60%, repeated Counselor. Bricks from the forest world Greenhaven, her tree-like form rustling with agitation. What of the remaining 40%? 2 billion beings cannot simply be abandoned. Valdris gestured to the display which showed the massive logistical challenge they faced. The mathematics are clear. Even with every available transport vessel, we cannot evacuate more than 60% before Object Omega-7's effects become irreversible. Admiral Corso stepped forward from the military section. Counselors, there may be an alternative worth considering. The chamber fell silent as the scarred Centaurian commander activated her own data display. Recent research at the Academy has revealed that some species develop very different approaches to seemingly impossible problems. I believe we should explore options beyond evacuation. Counselor Valdris tilted his head in confusion. Admiral, what other options could there be? Object Omega-7 has the mass of 3 collapsed stars. No known technology can alter its trajectory or reduce its gravitational effects. No known conventional technology, Admiral Corso corrected. But conventional thinking may not be sufficient for this situation. She gestured to Dr. Threnwick and Alex. Dr. Threnwick, would you please explain to the Council what your research has revealed about crisis-driven problem-solving? Threnwick rose nervously, his crystalline body flickering with uncertainty. Counselors, over the past month we have been studying species that develop under constant survival pressure. These species show radically different approaches to problem-solving, particularly when facing extinction-level events. The display shifted to show human historical data. Humans, for example, have survived dozens of planetary catastrophes by developing what we might call impossible solutions to impossible problems. Counselor Yex from the gas giant Nephron floated forward, her biosuit pulsing with skepticism. Dr. Threnwick, surely you're not suggesting that we base our response to this crisis on the behavior patterns of a single species. Alex stood up, his young voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation matrix. Counselor, with respect, you're not facing a normal problem. Normal solutions aren't going to work. The assembly stirred with interest and concern as the human cadet continued. Every species in this chamber evolved on stable worlds with predictable challenges. You've developed excellent strategies for gradual adaptation and careful planning. But Object Omega-7 isn't a gradual challenge. Valdris gestured for Alex to continue. What do you propose, young human? Alex moved to the display controls, bringing up new projections. Instead of trying to move 2 billion people away from the stellar remnant, what if we moved the stellar remnant away from the people? The chamber erupted in sounds of disbelief. Counselor Trex's aquatic translator rendered his response as impossible. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of our civilization. Would they? Alex asked, manipulating the display to show detailed calculations. What if we didn't try to move it all at once? What if we used its own momentum against it? Admiral Corso stepped forward to support the presentation. The human approach involves a series of precisely timed gravitational interactions. By deploying a network of artificial singularities along Object Omega-7's path, we could gradually alter its trajectory over the course of 12 months. The calculations floating in the holographic display showed a complex sequence of gravitational manipulations, each one building on the effects of the previous intervention. It was elegant, audacious, and completely unprecedented. Counselor Brix studied the projections with growing amazement. This would require coordination between dozens of species, technologies that have never been tested on this scale, and timing precise to within minutes across interstellar distances. Yes, Alex said simply. That's what makes it possible. Dr. Threnwick explained the apparent paradox. Humans have learned that the more impossible a situation appears, the fewer conventional responses are available. This actually simplifies decision-making because you can only attempt solutions that other species would never consider. Valdris looked around the chamber at his fellow counselors. Are we seriously considering a plan that involves creating artificial black holes and using them to redirect a stellar remnant? Do we have a choice? Admiral Corso asked bluntly. Evacuation saves 60%. This plan could save everyone. The debate that followed lasted for hours. Representatives from engineering-focused worlds pointed out the technical challenges. Species known for careful planning highlighted the risks of such an unprecedented operation. But gradually, a consensus emerged around a simple truth. Conventional solutions were insufficient for an unconventional crisis. As the discussion progressed, something remarkable happened. Other species began sharing their own histories of survival under impossible conditions. The rock dwellers of granite had survived their planet's core collapse by developing technologies that shouldn't have been possible. The ice fissures of frozen had maintained civilization through a 1,000-year winter by innovations that more stable species would never have considered. It appears, Valdris observed, that humans are not the only species to have survived through what we might call impossible adaptation. Alex nodded. We call them Deathworld survivors, species that didn't just survive extinction-level events, but learned to thrive in conditions that would destroy normal civilizations. The concept that emerged from that session would change galactic civilization forever. The formation of the Crucible Corps, an alliance of Deathworld species specifically tasked with solving impossible problems. Their first mission, Operation Stellar Redirect, the most audacious engineering project in galactic history. As the council session concluded, Valdris approached Alex with a mixture of respect and bewilderment. Cadet Stone, 3 months ago you were an unknown student at a military academy. Now you're proposing solutions to problems that threaten our entire civilization. Alex looked around the chamber at the representatives of dozens of worlds, all now committed to a plan that most of them still considered insane. Counselor, that's what happens when you've spent your entire evolutionary history learning that impossible problems require impossible solutions. The young human's quiet confidence carried a weight that came from hundreds of thousands of years of survival against all odds. As the galactic community prepared to attempt something that violated every principle of careful, conservative planning, they were about to learn what humans had always known. Sometimes the only way forward is through the impossible. Dr. Threnwick watched the proceedings with amazement, realizing that Alex's simple statement in a classroom had not just challenged academic theory, it had revealed capabilities that the galaxy desperately needed, just when they needed them most. Lieutenant Alex Stone stood in the command center of the Joint Task Force, watching as representatives from 37 different species worked together on the most impossible mission in galactic history. 6 months had passed since the formation of the Crucible Corps, and the artificial singularity deployment was entering its final phase. Around him, the controlled chaos of crisis management unfolded in patterns that would have seemed insane to conventional military thinking. Teams from the rock-dwelling granite worked alongside ice fissures from frozen, their combined expertise in extreme engineering creating solutions that neither could have developed alone. The holographic displays showed Object Omega-7's trajectory slowly, incrementally changing as each gravitational manipulation took effect. Singularity Generator 7 is approaching deployment position, reported Commander Kira, her biosuit flickering with the stress of coordinating multiple impossible operations simultaneously. Granite engineering teams confirmed structural integrity within acceptable parameters. Dr. Threnwick, now serving as the scientific advisor to the Crucible Corps, monitored the gravitational calculations from his position near the central display. The cumulative effect is exceeding our most optimistic projections. Object Omega-7's trajectory has shifted by 12 degrees from its original path. Alex felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same sensation he had experienced during every human crisis he had studied. The moment when success or failure balanced on decisions made under impossible pressure, when everything depended on people doing things that shouldn't be possible. Lieutenant, came the voice of Admiral Corso over the communication system. We're receiving reports that conventional evacuation efforts in the outer systems have been completed ahead of schedule. It appears that other species have adopted crisis adaptation techniques more quickly than anyone predicted. That news didn't surprise Alex. Over the past months, he had watched as representatives from stable world species learned to think in ways their evolutionary history had never required. The techniques developed by Deathworld survivors were spreading throughout galactic civilization, changing not just how they approached this crisis, but how they thought about problem-solving in general. Generator 8 deployment in 30 seconds, announced Chief Engineer Brahm. His bark-like skin darkened with concentration. The Verdanian had volunteered for the Crucible Corps despite his species' traditional preference for careful, gradual solutions. Icefisher teams report optimal positioning for maximum gravitational leverage. Alex studied the tactical display, where the culminating sequence of their impossible plan was about to unfold. 8 artificial singularities positioned with precision that required coordination across light years of space were about to create a gravitational cascade that would redirect a stellar remnant. All teams, this is Lieutenant Stone, he announced through the communication network. Remember, we've planned for everything to go wrong. When it does, stick to the contingency protocols and trust your training. The response came back in dozens of different languages, but the sentiment was universal. Species that had learned to expect success were working alongside species that had learned to plan for disaster. And somehow the combination was more effective than either approach alone. Deployment complete, Kira reported. All generators online and stable. Initiating final gravitational sequence. On the main display, Object Omega-7 began its final course change. The massive stellar remnant, with the gravitational force of collapsed stars, slowly but measurably altered its path through space. The inhabited systems that had been doomed to destruction would now remain safely outside its influence. As confirmation signals came in from monitoring stations throughout the affected region, Alex realized that they had actually succeeded. An impossible problem had been solved through impossible methods, and billions of lives had been saved because Deathworld survivors had learned to attempt what rational beings would never. Consider. Dr. Threnwick approached Alex with his crystalline body cycling through colors that indicated profound satisfaction mixed with amazement. Lieutenant, I've been analyzing the operational data from this mission. The techniques developed by the Crucible Corps aren't just effective for crisis situations. They're revolutionizing how we approach any complex problem. Alex nodded, watching as the mixed teams of galactic species began the careful process of deactivating their artificial singularities. When you assume that conventional solutions won't work, you get creative fast. It's more than that, Threnwick continued. Species from stable worlds are learning to think in ways they never could before. The Academy is receiving requests from hundreds of civilizations asking for training in crisis adaptation techniques. The professor gestured to the display showing communication traffic from across the galaxy. Your simple statement about human survival has become the foundation for an entirely new field of study. Universities throughout known space are establishing departments focused on Deathworld adaptation strategies. As the mission entered its final phase, Alex found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. Less than a year ago, he had been an unknown cadet whose only claim to distinction was coming from a planet that most civilizations would consider uninhabitable. Now he was leading operations that combined the survival expertise of multiple Deathworld species. Lieutenant Stone, came Admiral Corso's voice again, I'm receiving formal commendations from the Galactic Council. They want to establish the Crucible Corps as a permanent organization, specifically tasked with solving problems that conventional thinking can't address. Alex smiled, imagining the expressions on his old classmates' faces if they could see him now. Admiral, I think that's exactly what the galaxy needs. There are going to be more impossible problems in the future, and someone needs to be ready to solve them. Over the following months, the success of Operation Stellar Redirect transformed galactic civilization in ways no one had anticipated. The Crucible Corps became the destination for species that had survived their own extinction events, creating a coalition of survivors who specialized in achieving the impossible. Dr. Threnwick published his comprehensive study on crisis-driven evolution, fundamentally changing how the galaxy understood the development of intelligent life. The Academy established exchange programs with Deathworld species, teaching stable world civilizations how to think beyond their traditional limitations. But perhaps most importantly, the galaxy began to understand that diversity meant more than just different shapes and cultures. It meant different ways of thinking, different approaches to problems, and different definitions of what was possible. Alex, now promoted to captain and serving as the permanent commander of Crucible Corps operations, often thought back to that moment in Dr. Threnwick's classroom when he had quietly stated that 99% of his species were gone. At the time, it had seemed like a tragedy, a history of loss and near extinction that marked humans as victims of cosmic cruelty. Now he understood it differently. Humans hadn't survived despite losing 99% of their species. They had become who they were because of it. Every extinction event, every population crash, every moment when survival seemed impossible, had forged them into something the galaxy desperately needed. People who could look at impossible problems and find ways to solve them. As he watched mixed teams of Deathworld survivors working together on their next impossible mission, Alex realized that the 1% of humanity that had made it to the stars had brought something precious with them. Not just the knowledge of how to survive extinction, but the understanding that extinction was just another problem to be solved. The galaxy was learning what humans had always known. When everything is trying to kill you, you get really good at staying alive. And sometimes staying alive requires doing things that everyone else thinks are impossible,